Hi, welcome to the Chad Bozarth Show. Thanks for listening. Dr. Johnny Moffitt, thank you so much for joining me.
You bet. I'm glad to be here, buddy.
Wow, it has been a long time since I've seen you in person. I know you and my parents go way back. How did that connection happen?
Well, I knew you before you were born. When your dad was pastoring, we went to Christ for the Nations together. He graduated.
Oh,
Yeah, he graduated 1 year ahead of me and moved on to Florida. He started the church there in North Florida way before your time. Then I moved to Georgia, started preaching for him there. Later, he was moved down to a church between Jacksonville and Daytona called Beaches Chapel. And then from there, he went to Hilton Head, to Pioneer Church. And that's where you were born. And
yes.
you're a miracle child. I remember when your mother was pregnant with you, and then that one night they had to run to the hospital, and Hilton Head being in between Savannah and Charleston, your dad went to the wrong hospital. I don't, yeah. And anyway, and they, and we were praying and praying and praying. They dropped you on your head,
I know.
and that
That's kind of a running joke that people say, like, were you dropped on your head? And I kind of
yeah,
always have to awkwardly say, yeah, I actually
yeah.
was.
That nurse dropped you on your head, and boy, we didn't know if you was going to live or not. But we prayed and prayed. So, ever how old you are, I've known you 9 months longer than that. So. So your dad and I were very close, very good friends. I preached for him at all three churches, um, stayed in their home on many occasions, and I loved your dad, and I love your mom. They're great people, and I enjoy what God is doing with your life since then.
Wow. I really appreciate that. Wow. So you guys go back to the 70s at Christ for the Nations.
Yes,
Well, that's interesting to me. Well, let me ask you. I have to ask this.
sure.
How did you end up at Christ for the Nations from being in a motorcycle club?
Well, I was saved in 1971 at Trinity Church in Lubbock, Texas.
My wife
Uh,
is from Lubbock.
I know. And my pastor from that date of this, I got a local pastor where I go to church, but he's still my personal pastor. Morris Sheets was pastor of Trinity in those days, and he's well retired now, lives out in Lubbock. And so um, I was come out of the club in 1969. Uh, had some bad things happen in my life. Had lived underground for about a year. Um, then I decided, I was getting too old to live my life like that. I had to go do something. And my mother had passed away while I was in the club. And so my dad invited me to come live with him in Lubbock. So I went out there and met a girl, and she invited me to go to church. And I was, I'm stone pagan. What any difference in me going to the church or going to the movies? It's all the same thing. And so I went with her to be with her to church. But Pastor Morris was preaching, and he preached, read my mail. I got mad at the girl because I thought she was telling him about me, but she didn't know about me, so she couldn't tell him. So he was just God. And so on the last Sunday night in March 1971, uh, I was there. Uh, from the time I went to that church in early February, I just kept going. Got all about the girl, just kept going because I was so attracted to what Pastor Sheets was saying. And then in last Sunday night, the church went through a great revival, sort of like what we're seeing now. It was a church of about 300, had an evangelist come in to preach for a week. He stayed 2 weeks. 1,400 people got saved, and
Wow.
700 of them stayed in the church. So all of a sudden, this church in 2 weeks' time had gone from 300 to 1,000. and most of them were drug addicts off the streets. It was back when what they call the Jesus movement,
Hmm.
and this is all I'm just getting to a place, but before my time, a couple of weeks before my time. So when I went to that church, I came in right on the tail end of that revival. And the revival was over, but the church was busting out the seams, and they were hauling in chairs, and people were standing. They were sitting on the stage. They were standing around the walls. You had to get there an hour early to find a seat, and besides,
Wow.
you didn't want to miss what was going on. That was what was happening in those days. You see the movie of the Jesus movement. That's what it's all about. So anyway, uh, the last Sunday night in March, I was sitting on the back row of the church, and Pastor Sheets had gone and hired a youth pastor because he had all these. They've had a youth pastor before, but now he's got all these kids and, off of drugs and off the streets, and so he hired this youth pastor. And this youth pastor was a young guy, uh, and he had just started preaching. And matter of fact, this was that Sunday night was the first time he had ever preached in the church. So
Wow.
here he is, all excited, young kid, just fresh in the ministry, right on the tail end of every service. There'd be 15 or 20 people get saved. So he just knew he was
Wow.
going to set the house on fire, and he's going all excited and fired up, and 500 people were going to get saved and all that. He knew that, and he preached on the healing of Naaman, but he said something at the end of the sermon that I could relate to. He said, if you're not saved, God's already done all He's going to do for you. All He's
Hmm.
committed to do for you. He gave His life. He gave His Son. His Son died, rose again on the third day, and sat down at the right hand of the Father. And just like Naaman, it's your turn to do something with that. You can sit there and die on your donkey, or you can go down to the river and dunk yourself 7 times. But it's not
Hmm.
God's move anymore. It's your move.
Hmm.
I heard my mother, who'd been in heaven for a couple of years, I heard her singing through a skylight in that church.
Hmm.
I came up off of that seat and ran down the aisle. Pastor Sheets was standing in front of the altar trying to look cool. Back in those days, it's 3-piece suit and patent leather shoes, general pastor attire. And I got running down there, 315 pounds with beard parting in the middle, blowing back like Low Chimney Sam, had a 38 pistol in my boot in case anybody wanted to hurt me while I was at church. Run down, run down that aisle. I just ran over faster, just knocked him against the pulpit and back up. And I had him by his head, like this, and he said to another pastor, he said, "Take this guy to a prayer room. Take this guy to a prayer room." So this associate pastor took me back to a prayer room, and I gave my life to Christ, and all of a sudden was praying in words I never heard. I said, "What in the world's going on?" He said, "Don't worry about it. Just enjoy it." So I was saved and baptized in the Holy Spirit and called to preach in about 5 minutes time. Hit the road running. I hadn't stopped since. That was in 1971. That's how I got into the ministry anyway. And I didn't know, I didn't even know, he looked at me and he said, uh, that's in the Bible. Said, look in Luke 174. He said, when I saw you running down the aisle, God told me to tell you that Luke 174 is for you. And I said, great. What's a Luke? I don't know what he was talking about, but he told it to me in the Bible. It says, Luke 174 says that he would grant unto us that we, having been delivered from our enemies, can serve him without fear. So I was
Wow.
delivered from a spirit of fear, called to preach, and I was on the road, and I was 2 weeks later, I was standing on the back of a flatbed truck preaching in a Piggly Wiggly parking lot. And
Wow.
I didn't even know what I was saying. In fact, I preached the whole Bible from Holy Bible to genuine leather. I preached the whole thing in less than 10 minutes. I'm walking down off steps off of this flatbed truck, and Pastor Sheets met me on the steps and says, "Next time, talk about something you know." That was in the day, buddy. That was in the day. So the next night, I preached back up there again, and I just said, "Hey, you guys know me. You see me in the news. You've seen me with handcuffs. You've seen me every way that you can see a person. But I'm just telling you that old man's dead. Something happened to me, and I love Jesus." 40 something people in the parking lot gave their heart to Christ that day, and I still didn't even know what a Luke was. But Pastor Sheets took me under his wing, and we had class every morning from 6 to 7 in the morning. every 5 days a week for a solid year, teaching me the Bible and teaching me what was going on, teaching me how to live, teaching me how to act, teach me how to dress, teach me what everything. He sowed into my life for a solid year. So uh, I hadn't got to your question yet, but I'm trying to get there. How did I get where I am?
Wow.
I went from a year later, after a year later of study with Pastor, I met Betty. Betty came into my life there at the church. I met her in 72, actually on New Year's Eve of 71. And then in 1972, we met in that January, started dating in February, and got married in March. That's quick. That's 53 years ago, and she's still putting up with me. So I guess it worked out.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we spent a year working on a cattle ranch, and miracle after miracle at the end of that year, I got laid off and didn't know what to do. And uh, God told me, this miracle told me to start a boys ranch.
Hmm.
So, I ran back to the house, told Betty, I says, God told me to start a boys ranch. And she said, well, what do we do? I said, I don't have the foggiest idea. We worked about 3 years just knocking on doors and telling people what the vision was. And God built the ranch. And I was just out there. They had me back recently to speak at their 50th anniversary of the first child. It's now Texas Girls and Boys Ranch. They minister to about 300 kids a year, have an adoption agency and everything. And uh, I, they we were there twice this year. They were recognizing the, giving us honor, and Betty and I, we just appreciated that so much. But at the end, in about 75, I just figured out I was in and over my head. The boys ranch got bigger than me. Um, we raised millions of dollars, free land, got 320 acres of land donated,
Wow.
built the first cottage, started on the second cottage, paid cash for everything, multi-million-dollar facility, but it's way grown beyond that now. It's up to maybe 500 something acres, probably 30, 40 kids in permanent residence. They built a huge, big gym. It just, it's just a great place, and it's a blessing in our life. But to be the founders of that organization at the Boys Ranch. But I figured it out. It was way over my head, and it had a couple of prophetic words. And I decided the reason it was over my head because I didn't have the education.
Hmm.
Certain licenses in Texas, you got to have a certain kind of degree for childcare. When you start messing around with people's kids, that's pretty deal. And I didn't qualify educationally. I just had the vision, and it was going like crazy. But I decided I better do something about my education. And one of the men in the church said, go ahead and talk to them at Christ of the Nations. That's where you ought to start. Because I'd been
Hmm.
kicked out of Texas Tech in 61 when I graduated because I didn't go to class. I didn't get mad. I liked going to Texas Tech. I played pool all day long at student union to make money. But they didn't. They said I had to go to class, so they wouldn't let me come back. So I spent 4 years in the Air Force before I went into the club. So anyway, I got to I said, okay, I'll go check it out. And I went and checked out Christ of the Nations. And first thing you knew, I was a student there. Started in 61. Betty and I both graduated in 71. Both of us graduated in 78. We started in 76. We graduated in 78.
Hmm.
And your dad graduated in 75, I think.
Hmm.
So, and we graduated in 76. So uh, from that, uh, I moved to Georgia, Milledgeville, Georgia, when I graduated, and we had been invited to Milledgeville. There is a lady named Cookie Rodriguez. Cookie Rodriguez started the ministry called New Life for Girls. She was one of the first drug addicts, along with Nikki Cruz, that was saved under the
Hmm.
David Wilkerson ministry, Teen Challenge and
Wow.
stuff. And there's a book about Cookie called Please Make Me Cry. But Cookie, I had met Cookie. We become friends, and I went to work for Cookie while I was my last semester at Christ of the Nations. And I would travel around where she was going to go do a citywide crusade, and I would do the pre crusade work for her.
Mm,
Uh, and then I had learned how to raise money for ministry, so I'd teach our center directors how to raise money, and during that time. But during that time, I went to Milledgeville, Georgia, to set up a crusade for her,
mm.
and met some people there. And so when I came back to Christ for the Nations, I was trying to decide what I'm going to do with my life and where I was going to go from there, and how I was going to further my education. And got a call from these some businessmen in Milledgeville asking me to come there and start a prison ministry, because there was six
Wow.
prisons right there in that city, six prisons in Milledgeville.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Huntsville of Georgia. It's the prison
Mm,
capital of Georgia.
mm,
During the before the Civil War, Milledgeville was the capital of Georgia. That's where
mm.
the Capitol building is. They owned a lot of government property and that sort of thing. And so they built all these prisons on that government property after the Civil War. So they invited us to come there. So you know what? We loaded up and we went there. We just felt like that's
Wow.
what God wanted us to do. And they said they would supply us with a house to live in and give us support. So that was way before cell phones. So it took us 2 days to drive there with a truck, pull in the car, and all of our stuff in the truck. So I get to Georgia, we got there with $100 bill and a truck full of furniture. And somewhere between the time we left Christ for the Nations and the time we got to Georgia, those men changed their mind. And so we were there with $100 bill and a truck full of furniture and no place to live. And I thought, wow, if I had enough money to buy gas to get back to Dallas, I'd be back in Dallas. I didn't. And this one medical doctor, bless his heart, he said, y'all can stay in my guest room. Now, we had two little boys, and Betty was 9 months
I was gonna
pregnant.
ask, did you have kids at this time?
Yeah, we had two little boys. Betty, we got married. Betty, she had one boy, and then we had a boy, and and she was 9 months pregnant with my daughter.
Oh
And,
my
and
goodness.
here we got the Milledgeville, and we're living in this one room with one double bed. The boy slept on the floor, and Betty and I slept in that bed, and she carried Emily, my daughter. She carried Emily for 10 months because we didn't have the money to go pay the hospital. And so we always joke around and say Emily was grown when she was born. She weighed 10 pounds and carried her own diaper bag. I said we couldn't afford to pay a hospital, but God was in it. God was in what we were doing, and we didn't even know it. And so finally, she couldn't handle it no more. And so we went to the hospital. She had that baby, got ready to leave. And I said, what do I got to make some kind of payment arrangements with you. And they said, no, somebody paid that whole bill. And somebody paid all the hospital bill. We never spent a dime. We never even bought that baby a diaper till she was 2 years old. Never bought her any. God just blessed us. Was just that I always say she's a blessed girl because God just kept sending her stuff. Just all of her clothes, everything was paid for her. And so there we were trying to struggle. And I said, well, I was in the engineers in the Air Force. I poured cement. So I just started pouring cement for the local contractor I'd met in the church there. And I'd pour cement in the daytime and go to prison at night. And just started going to prisons. And then God just miraculously opened doors for prisons. And I began to do all the prisons in Georgia. And the first thing you know, I'm preaching in other states. And I meet a whole bunch of other prison ministers. And it grew and grew and grew and grew. And first thing you know, I'm going internationally. Now I've been in prisons in 27 countries and 35 states. And we just celebrated our 47th anniversary as a prison ministry. And all the
Wow.
time working on my education while I traveled and through correspondence and everything. And uh, I've gotten one earned doctorate degree and then one honorary doctorate degree. And so
Wow.
I learned what mayonnaise was.
Mm.
I got a better education. So
Let
that's
me ask you,
that's how life's kind of went parallel like that.
that is amazing and congratulations on that. Wow. What was it like when you first started going into prisons?
Well,
Was the concept of prison ministry around back then, or what did that look like?
no, there was very few, very few. I tell you, uh, I went into prison ministry because I couldn't get out of it. That's a strange way to say it, but I was not
Mm.
interested in thinking about doing prison ministry. But my brother went to prison. My brother was in prison in Texas in 1955, back when Texas prison system was a real live prison system. I went
Mm.
into my first prison when I was 12 years old. I went into what used to be called the Sugarland Farm. It's non-existent now. They tore it down, but you went in the Sugarland Farm. And when I was 12 years old, my mom and dad, we went down. They drove us from Lubbock all the way down to Sugarland, Texas, and to see him. And I
Mm.
saw what the real prison was like. I never did forget that. And then when I was young, as a teenager, he went to was convicted of a crime and went to prison. He came home from prison, so it was kind of in our family. I had a couple of cousins that went to prison. We were a pretty rowdy bunch, and so that wasn't in my future. I didn't even think about the future in those days. But when I was at the boys' ranch, when we were building the boys' ranch and trying to get it open, uh, a young man in our church got in some trouble and was sentenced to federal prison, and they sent him to El Reno, Oklahoma. And I went to church one day, and his mother walked up to me and says, "I have fixed it where you can go to Sugarland. I mean, go to Texarkana Federal Prison and do the Sunday service where my son is." And I said, I didn't know I wanted to do that." She said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, you're going there, and you're going there a week after next." I said, "Really?" I said, "Let me see about that." And I thought, well, we'll just see what happens.
Mm.
So I had a friend that was a guitar player and singer. He used to play with Buddy Holly and them because, in Lubbock is where Buddy was from. Anyway, I asked him if he'd go up there and lead the music for me while I was going to preach in El Reno. And he said the same thing I did. He said, I didn't know I wanted to do that. I said, well, I would appreciate it. And he said, okay. So we went to Oklahoma City, went to Reno, Oklahoma, El Reno. And in that federal prison, uh, I met a man, uh, a big man, African American man, who was sent to that prison when he was 18 years old,
Mm.
and for uh, thievery, thieving. He committed his crime in Washington D.C., and that's not a state; that's a district. And so, if you commit a crime in Washington D.C., you go to a federal prison, not a state prison, a federal prison.
Mm.
So he went. It's like committing a crime on an Indian reservation. You go to a federal prison. So anyway, he was sentenced to that prison for 5 years for thievery. He stole a loaf of bread out of uh, a little grocery, it's like a 7-Eleven thing. He stole a
Mm.
loaf of bread to eat because he's hungry. He had raised himself on the streets of Washington, D.C. since he was 5 years
Mm.
old. He
Mm.
lived on the streets. At 18, he was convicted and he was sent there.
Mm.
But he was so in love with Jesus in that chapel, and we just bonded that day. And I thought, man, this is interesting. And we had they had the visitors that day could go to church. So we had a couple of parents and 4 or 5 inmates got saved. And it's just kind of exciting, for a young minister still in Bible school. So shortly after that was when we were negotiating what are we going to do, and I was dealing with the state over my education level as a director of a children's home, and that's when we decided to go to Christ for the Nations. So I go to Christ for the Nations, and the first day they having head of heads of student ministries talk at chapel,
Mm.
and the first guy to talk was the guy in charge of the prison ministry.
Mm.
So I'm sitting there in the audience as a brand new freshman. And I go, I'm just going to go talk to that guy. So I went and talked to him, told him my experience, and I thought I might be interested in prison ministry. So I joined the prison ministry at Christ of the Nations, and in my second year at Christ of the Nations, I was the leader of the prison ministry for student ministries at Christ of the Nations. So that was in my blood. And then when I went to work for Cookie and went to Milledgeville, I preached 15 times in 10 days. I'm
Wow.
getting ready for that. And I preached in all the prisons. I preached in the state hospital. I preached in the courthouse. I preached in churches, three or four churches, both Sundays. And I had sprained my back getting off the airplane. And that they would put me in the back of a van, drive me to the next place, prop me up, and I'd preach. They'd put me back in the van. That whole 10 days when I was getting on the plane, my back quit hurting to come back to Dallas. And about 2 weeks later, those guys called me and said, I want you to come here and start a prison ministry. And so since that day, I've never been to a prison where I couldn't get in. I mean, I was just I've been to prisons in communist countries. I've been to prison in Cuba. We did ministry in Cuba for still got partners in Cuba for a long time. Pray for Cuba. That hurricane did a job on a lot of my friends down there. We have three strong supporters down there. I've taught prison ministry seminars to 1,000 people at a time in Cuba. It's just a
Mm.
miracle what's going on down there in the church. But uh, when the Soviet Union broke up, within 90 days we were in the prisons in Estonia, Russia, Latvia, Belarus. And we
Wow.
went there for years, just going back and forth. Went to Russia probably 5 times a year, or Estonia and Latvia and Belarus. Uh, and so anyway, we were helping them find out that they needed chaplains in their prisons. And so anyway, that's what I've done, and that's how I got into prison ministry. And God has opened everywhere. I mean, I've done in the worst prisons in the United States. We've done services there multiple times, like San Quentin in California, Attica in New York, over and over and over again. Uh, uh, in Florida, and then we started majoring on marriage seminars. So that's our major since probably '95.
Mm.
We just completed our 89th marriage 3-day marriage seminar in a Texas prison for the inmates, and
Wow.
we've done 10 for guards. It's a 3-day seminar. We take all our volunteers and train them on Thursday night and Friday morning. The wives arrive Friday, and then the state of Texas allows me to take the wives into the prison for 3 days. We put them in a motel at night, and they go to prison for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And
Wow.
they'll spend more time in that one weekend than they will a year of visitation. And they eat every meal with their husbands. They uh, have classes all day, Friday,
Mm.
Saturday, and Sunday. And so we've done 10 for guards. For guards, we do a marriage retreat, go to a Christian camp, same thing, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We pay that whole bill for guards. It's free to them. We actually charge the wife because uh, the state asked us to start charging them because we had wives that would register and did not show up, and we'd just be stuck with a hotel bill and a food bill, and so they asked us to start charging the actual costs, and so we do that. But for the guards, we pay it completely, and our sponsors, people that support our ministry. And so we did by doing the 89 now we've done for prison ministers, and 10 we've done for officers. Now in March of next year, Chad, it's a total miracle. In March of next year, we're going to have a 3-day marriage enrichment retreat for 30 senior wardens. Never been done.
Wow.
Never been done.
Wow.
And we're footing that whole bill. We're paying that whole bill. We rented a great camp down on the Guadalupe River and down in the hill country. We're going to be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with these correctional wardens of major prisons. These guys are uh, I call them qualified survivors.
Mm.
Chuck Colson gave me that term. He said we were talking about prison guards and wardens. He said they're just qualified survivors. So we're working with the state system We've got 110 senior wardens in the state of Texas, and we're going to have 30 of them and their spouse for 3 days and tell them how Jesus can save their marriage.
Hmm.
Most of them have been divorced, and they say they got divorced when they were guards.
Really?
Yeah, divorce rate amongst the inmates is 97%. Divorce rate against with the guards is 92%.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, it's a stressful vocation. It's the second highest suicide vocation in this country.
Hmm.
After this will shock you, but the highest is among dentists. Second highest is correctional people. And
Really?
yeah, yeah, it's really strange where stress comes from. So
Hmm.
actually the state has asked us to do one for wardens. Many wardens have asked us to do one for them, and so we're going to do that in March. We're all booked to do that in March. So
Hmm.
pray for us that we're expecting. You know, Jesus said, not me. Jesus said that you're blessed or you're cursed based on whether or not you visited the prisoner. That's
Hmm.
pretty strong. You read that in Matthew.
Hmm.
He said, "Stand here. When you're blessed," he said, "when did you visit the prisoner, feed the hungry, clothe the naked? If you did that, you're blessed. If you didn't do it, you're cursed."
Hmm.
So I think every church, if you're not involved in prison ministry, you got to think about it. You can't be blessed.
Let me ask you this. Maybe any young person that's listening to this, sometimes the question comes up, God, if you would just tell me what you want me to do, I would do it.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you just kind of jumped in the ocean and rode the wave where God took you for these past years. It's amazing. What would you say to somebody who, I mean, you just jumped in.
Well, I had to. That's the way. To me, that's the way I read the Bible.
Hmm.
Uh, People ask me, says, "How do you know you're in the will of God?" I said, "When I find myself in the perfect will of God, I can tell you, I just backed into it.
Hmm.
I didn't go after anything. The only thing I knew was when I was broke and busted. Listen, when I had the vision for the boys' ranch, I had 30 days to get out of my house, no job, and a $5 bill. One son and another on the way. And it was 15 days to a Christmas.
Hmm.
And I went down and sat down under a tree in Lubbock. About a half a mile from my house, there was a tree. That's pretty close in Lubbock.
Hmm.
Trees are few and far between. So I walked down there and sat down under that tree, and I was complaining to God. And I got a hold of this verse that I call it the Pentecostal cop out. It's Romans, where it says, "All things work together for good to them that love God and called according to his purpose." And I quoted it and I quoted it and I quoted and I quoted. And the more I quoted it, the more I didn't believe it.
Hmm.
And finally,
Hmm.
I screamed out at God. I said, "God, that's a bald-faced lie.
Hmm.
You don't have any idea what's going on." And I said, "God, here I am. I got a pregnant wife. I got a little boy. I got 30 days to get out of my house, less than 30 days, no job, no future, no. And you're telling me that all this is working together for good." I said, "That's a lie." And I will give you a hint. God screamed at me. You hadn't lived, Chad, until God screams at you. I want you to understand that. I've had three visions in my life, and this was the first one. And this was when he yelled at me. And I heard God as clear as you can hear me. I'm not one to go around hearing God to tell me to do stuff all the time, but I heard him that day, sitting out there in that field under a tree. God said, "Fat boy," that's what he called me. He called me fat boy. He said, "That is a promise. It is not a pacifier. And if you'll quit chewing on that, if you'll quit sucking on that and start chewing on that, I'll show you something." And I leaned back against the tree. You see, I just called God a bald-faced lie. He's not going to call me my beloved son. He's pretty hot. And I leaned back on that tree and opened my eyes, and I saw that boy's ranch. I saw the buildings. I saw it as plain as I see this computer screen I'm looking at right now. I saw it. And I jumped up and run back to the house, and I told Betty God's told me to start a boys' ministry. And that's the only miraculous vision to do something that's ever happened to me in my 50 something years of ministry. The rest of it, I just went through the next door that was open in front of me. I didn't go around kicking on doors, and I didn't turn away from the open doors, but I didn't try to get through closed doors. I just, okay, I just just do the next thing God puts in front of you. That's all you got to do. Just do the next thing God says for you to do. So when somebody says to me, I don't know what God wants me to do, I said, go back to the last thing he told you. The last thing he told you to do that. And he'll tell you to do something else. And that's the way God moved us to Crestwood Nations. That's the way God moved us to Georgia. I never thought of going to Milledgeville, Georgia. What are you talking about? I'm a Texas boy. I'm not going to go to Milledgeville, Georgia. I never heard of Milledgeville, Georgia. Didn't even know there was such a place. That we lived there 14 years. In 92, we moved back to Texas because I was beginning to travel internationally. And Texas is our home. Pastor Sheets was here in Dallas with the church. And it made more sense because you can fly anywhere in the world from DFW Airport in Dallas, and you can't do it from Milledgeville. You got to drive 3 hours to get to an airport. So we moved here to do that, and we just kind of took off from there. And I had begun to. You asked me if there were many prison ministers when I started. We couldn't find any to teach us how to do it. We had no idea how to do what we were doing. I said, look, I don't know how to do this thing. First year I was there, I said, okay, I'm going to have a prison ministry conference. I'm going to bring people here to tell me how to do it. And I'll just host a conference. Nobody else is doing it. So we ran an ad in a national magazine, and there's 150 people showed up in Milledgeville, Georgia for that conference. And I met people and great friends of mine, probably the grandfather of prison ministries, Chaplain, what man used to call Chaplain Ray, named Raymond Hawkstray, lived here in Dallas. He was on like 200 radio stations talking about lonely prisoners in lonely prison cells. He'd been around the world. He put 3 million Bibles in Russian prisons when it was closed. He put over 1 million Bibles in the Indian prisons. And he was just I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and one of the great prison ministries, Bill Glass, who's now in heaven, Bill Glass spoke, and he says, I've been to 5,687 prisons, and I've never been to a prison that Chaplain Ray hadn't already been there.
Wow.
Well, we called Chaplain Ray. He came and spoke. We became close friends. He became one of my mentors. Met a guy named Frank Cosentino out of Florida, mafia connected guy who got saved in prison, became the prison minister for the 700 Club, then started his own prison ministry. And when he passed away, he was a consecrated bishop in the Charismatic Episcopal denomination. He would run 7 prisons, aftercare centers for the state of Florida, 2 in England and 1 in Egypt. Hello.
Wow.
That was an ex-convict doing all that. And he began to teach me. He became one of my mentors. We began to grow. We connected prison ministries from all over the United States. And all of a sudden we started collecting prison ministries from the world. That grew into an organization called COPE, Coalition of Prison Evangelists. We had something like 3,000 around the world, prison ministers in that group. And then one year we did, back in the 80s, we did what we called the National Prison Invasion, where we went into every prison in the United States on the same day.
Wow.
All these ministries worked together and had their designated area. And the National Prison Invasion was headed up by Frank Cosentino and Chaplain Ray and a guy named Paul Carlin. And my responsibility was Georgia. I had 50 prisons in Georgia. I was responsible for getting volunteers, speakers, singers, go into all these prisons all on the same day and across America. And out of that, there were like 150 to 200 brand new prison ministries started from that group.
Wow.
And it's going on for now forever. So like right now, I have over 10 ex-offenders. Let me say that again, ex-offenders, guys I
Mm.
met in prison who are now out of prison and have major prison ministries. And
Wow.
I'm working with them in just kind of what you're going to fathering these guys, training and
Mm.
helping those guys now. So
Wow.
I've got guys that was oh, I have guys that have 30 years in prison, 35 years in prison. Some of
Wow.
my that are now strong prison ministries that we're training. Now they're everywhere. Prison ministries are everywhere. It's
Mm.
almost like the thing to do is to do prison or jail ministry. And I'm
Wow.
so grateful. And I'll tell you how effective it is. When I came back to Texas in 92, the recidivism rate, that's the rate of uh, prisoners get out of prison. That's the rate they go back to prison within 2 years. That
Mm.
recidivism rate was 76%.
Mm.
76% of the people that got out of prison within 2 years would be back in prison. Okay.
Mm.
You know what it is today?
No.
16,
Wow.
16%. It has fallen that much. That's not because of me. It's because of the volunteers, the programs that these prisons are running. There's all kinds
Wow.
of programs in prison right now, and guys are getting their college degrees, and they're getting the system is changing. It's growing, and Texas has become a model. People, other states are looking at Texas. It's the lowest. Our recidivism rate is the lowest in the nation
Wow.
because good things are happening in those prisons. And it's things like our marriage seminars. It's like things
Mm.
like Day with Dads. So that's great programs. And
Mm.
family days and athletic programs, and Alcoholics Anonymous and Overcomers drug programs. Good, solid program. Right now in Texas, just almost every week, 3 or 4 prisons are having anti-drug rallies
Mm.
with ex-offender drug addicts doing all the speaking.
Mm.
Hello. And it's changing the system. It's changing where people coming out of prison don't have to go back again.
Mm.
So God is what makes the difference. When
Mm.
George W. Bush was elected governor of Texas years ago, about the time I got here from Georgia, Governor Bush said, "We have tried everything in the prison system and none of it works. Let's give the church an opportunity." All the prisons now are mandated to let the church in
Mm.
and do the volunteer work. And that's made the difference. That's made the difference.
Wow.
They bought into it. And all those guys that were officers, correctional officers back in those days, they saw it. They see that, guess what? Time goes by and people move up. And all those officers are now wardens. Hello. And
Mm.
it's just, it's how you turn Jesus loose and he'll change stuff,
Well,
change
Dr.
the world.
Johnny, it is amazing what you're doing, and I want to thank you for sharing your story. Before we wrap up, I have to ask, you've been married for 53 years.
Yeah. Be
What's the
54 in
secret?
March.
What's the secret?
What's the secret? Betty says, don't kill him. That's her secret. Mine is don't leave. Uh, marriage is work, Chad. It you don't wake up every morning in love with that thing laying there next to you in the bed. You don't do it. I don't care what anybody tells you. Uh, it is commitment. I heard a, uh marriage counselor say one day when asked a question, she was asked the question, "What is this common thing about long-term marriages?" There's got to be something common in all long-term marriages, or the majority. And the marriage psychiatrist said, "Oh yeah, there's two things that are very apparent in all long-term marriage. That's marriage is over 25 years." She said, number one is commitment, a commitment to the marriage, not even a commitment to each other, but a commitment to the marriage. That's the number one. And number two is a shared religious experience.
Mm.
Those two things, she said, are common in long-term marriages. And I found that to be true. Uh, there's tough times. We've had hard times in our marriage, but we've both been committed to the marriage, and we're committed to each other.
Mm.
And now our kids all love God. We have one of them uh, is a retired chef. One of them is a pastor, associate pastor and missions director at a mega church in Florida, Travis. And then my daughter Emily is a much in demand, very successful uh, high dollar development interior designer. She's an
Mm.
interior designer for a large corporation that builds mega uh, buildings, multi multi-family residential facilities around the United States.
Mm.
And so I got four wonderful grandkids, and one's a senior in high school. The oldest one's a senior in high school. He goes to a school in Maine for his senior year. He's going to he wants to get into politics, going
Mm.
to a high school up there, the residential high school, where he is learning that kind of stuff. Uh, the third of the students up there are from other nations.
Mm.
And then that was when my phone was ringing a while ago. That's my grandson who was Chinese. My daughter adopted him from China when he was 2 years old. He's right now in the hospital in Omaha. Surgery. He has a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta, which is brittle bone disease. He breaks bones a lot.
Mm. Mm.
So he's laying up there now with two or three broken bones in his legs. Just had surgery, and they're going to fly home today. And then my other one, I got one son, another one grandson is 16, and he is in Florida, and he is listen, 16 years old. He is a second degree black belt in martial arts. 16 years
Wow.
old. He's
Wow.
teaching martial arts. He's judging martial arts. So
Wow.
he loves God with all his heart. Biggest prayer warrior you ever knew, Chad. So
Mm.
and then I got one granddaughter. So God's been good. God's blessed, and we build our life around our kids. And so we're uh, getting older, and but God just keeps blessing and blessing, and we stay together because we are committed to the marriage, and we have a shared religious experience.
Mm.
And we teach a class in our home. It's part of our church called Growing Up Spiritually and Emotionally, and we're helping other people in that church come to a place where they if you have a fit when you're two, it's okay. But if you have a fit when you're 40, it's wrong. So you gotta grow up. So Ephesians says grow up in Ephesians 4. It says you to grow up. So we teach this class that God gave us a few
Mm.
years ago when we were working on our marriage, and we went to I believe in professional counselors,
Mm.
and we didn't go together to a marriage counselor. We went to individual counselors. I'm not too
Mm.
sure that marriage counseling together works. Maybe it
Mm.
does to some people, but individually, I guarantee you it works.
Mm.
And my counselor is a lady who only counsels ministers.
Mm.
That's the only people she'll counsel. And guess what? Her book is full.
Mm.
I mean, that's how many we all need help, Chad. Everybody needs
Mm.
help, and it it that's helped us a lot. It's helped Betty a lot. It's helped me a lot. And it was more intense a few years ago, probably 20 years ago, when the marriage got tough. Things get tough. Finances get tough.
Mm.
Um, Finances will get tough. Events happen. Stuff happens. All the time. Our building burned down once. I had a couple of
Mm.
staff members that betrayed me. Um, so that's not unique. I'm not unique. That happens all around the world. and we have to deal with it. And you'll have trouble. You'll have times in your marriage where it's tough, and but God's always there. Trust God. Trust God together, and stay committed to what you commit to. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. When you said to that woman, I'm going to stay with you for the rest of your life, I don't mean when it gets bad, I'm out of here. It means I'm going to be here with you. And that's the secret. It's just don't leave.
Hmm, that's good.
Work on it
Doc,
every day.
Dr. Johnny, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your testimony, and I am so encouraged. And uh, we're gonna have to go out to lunch or something sometime because I know you're in the area. So this was
Yeah, I'm right here.
fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm right here in my office all the time. Just give me a call. I'd love to take you to lunch. But just call me anytime. And I got a list of guys that you need to hear. You need to have on your podcast.
I would
We
love to have
really,
that list.
some of these guys that did 35 years in prison. I got one guy that works with us. They put him in a box 5 by 5 by 5, and he's 6'4", and they
Oh
left
my
him there
gosh.
13 months. Let me tell you something. They got and Jesus met him in that box.
Hmm.
So, uh, yeah, let's get together and I'll give you a list. Yeah,
I would love to.
yeah. Well, I enjoy being in your closet.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this is I got the clothes around me and I'm away from everybody and this is
If anybody
I
asks me, "Are you very close to Chad Bozarth?" I said, "Oh yeah, I've been in his closet."
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Johnny.
Love you, man. Love your family.
Thank you.